Do schools contribute to social equality? Should schools contribute to social equality? One way to examine this question is to go back and examine how schools came to be the way that they are today. Certainly, education wasn't always set up as we know it today. If we go back thousands of years, education was very different. Across the world, whether sub-Saharan African, indigenous North American, European, Asian, education was very local. Education was within the domain of families and communities, through stories, through teaching children skills, very much like apprenticeships. In many cultures, there were rites of passage during adolescence or puberty, or during youthhood, ceremonies and programs preparing children for adulthood. In ancient Greece, various systems began to evolve. In Spartan education, for example, there was military training from 7 years old that it focused on play and exercise, all the way up to 30 years old, involving rhetoric, speaking ability, persuasion. But this was for the male children, and only those deemed worthy of keeping alive. In the Athenian system, education focused on mind, morals, and body, dealing with reason and virtue. But they felt that not all children could be taught virtue, only the philosopher kings. Writing was actually discouraged because if people learned how to write, they would no longer need to remember. In ancient Rome, education happened at home, focusing on writing, poetry, and oratory. But this was just the slave owners, who would often have slaves educate their children. In Asia, the Oriental system produced moral citizens based on Confucian teachings under the principles of goodness and harmony. After the national exam, the best moved on and formed an elite class. It was during the Dark Ages, in the 12th and 13th centuries, that universities began, and there was not as much focusing on learning in schools in the early Common Era during the decline of the Roman Empire. Under the feudal system, the only way for ordinary people to learn was by associating themselves with the church. Churches and monasteries became the primary agents for education in schools, including during the early years of overseas colonization. We have examples in Canada, of course, which led to the long-standing effects of residential schools. In Europe, when the private schools and the state schools were developed, these were actually seen as a form of resistance. And it was only the rich that could attend. Only the very, very elite were literate, because literacy afforded them the high-ranking roles in society: nobility, clergy, intellectuals. So they went to school for this. The others formed the working classes. No matter how bright, how capable they were, what potential they had, and so on. Then, two historical moments changed all of this: the Enlightenment
and the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution
saw a change in the political economy, in social class structures, in mass education. It's when we first saw assembly line education, not that different to assembly line production of cars, of widgets, of sofas. But the Enlightenment era offered a very different philosophy about the idea of education. The Enlightenment was built on the French notion of liberty, democracy, equality. The idea that there was an opportunity for all to be citizens, that everyone could participate in society, in economy, and in politics. The idea that all citizens should have access to a good life, not just some, and that education could play a central role in doing so. So this is when we first started to see this idea of public education. In 1807, the first public funds for funding for education emerged in Ontario. In the United States, Horace Mann, a member of the House of Representatives for Massachusetts, in this dated language proposed that education could be the great equalizer, meaning that all students, girls, boys, rich, poor, white, black, would rise as far as their talents and hard work would take them. This is what has been come to be known as a meritocracy. Basically, the idea to which you succeeded in society and in life would depend on how hard you worked. So sure, there would be some difference between individuals based on genetic predisposition, natural gifts towards learning certain skills, maybe math or languages or science comes easier to some over others, some physical abilities. But generally speaking, different groups in society, different classes, different cultures, different genders should all have an equal chance to succeed. Meritocracy, a society based on merit, not on caste, not on race, not on gender. So is this true? Do we live in a meritocracy? There are any number of statistics that we could look at to help us find an answer to this question. The high school dropout rate is 6% for high income students, 40% for low income students. Non-Indigenous students are 78% likely to graduate from post-secondary institutions. Indigenous students, 35% likely. LGBTQ plus youth are 2 to 6 times more likely to commit suicide during their schooling years. 39% of men starting university choose science-related subjects versus 14% of women who choose science-related subjects. Students from low-income families are far more likely to take applied courses in high school, while students from high-income families take academic courses. So how do we explain this? Especially if we believe that we live in a meritocracy. Is there a genetic difference in the social categories of society that affect these outcomes? Does race, ethnicity, class, income, gender, sexuality affect skills and intelligence? Or is there something deeper at play in our system that affects these outcomes? As we continue to work through this question in our course, one thought and one reminder is that the system is socially constructed.